with that having said, let me move to the next question that is kind of also connected, because you mentioned the percentage of companies that needed to change or introduce major changes to the kind of digital learning approach, but you also, I remember from out of your of the data in your report that your research showed that almost 80% of companies have been using learning tech for more than 3 years now altogether. And still the conclusion was, if I remember correctly, that they were not very advanced when it comes to use. And you alluded to the fact, okay, that it's partially because people are not so maybe digital savvy yet. But why do you think many organizations, even though they have this learning technology, they offer mostly basic experience? Because I remember this is what I saw in one of the slides, and that was very intriguing for me. Yeah, that even those of them who've been using it for quite some time, they are not very advanced yet.
Yeah, and it's a really good question, and I'm not sure we necessarily have all the answers there, but I think so. You know, when we say basic, I think what we're talking about is maybe using all the features, but not necessarily pushing forward. And actually, I mean, one of the things that we do find is that learning development folks tend to be what we kind of term order takers. So in other words, if somebody in the organization says, we want to do this, then, and we want to train somebody on this, then they go away and they create a course and they put it online, and then they deliver it. And I think we need to be a little bit more advanced than that and think about what are the outcomes, what are the reasons for doing this. So, you know, going back, I mean, what over the last 20 years has been the key for learning technology has been the compliance piece. It's been about the mandatory training that has to be done, and therefore if it can be done online, it can be consistent, everybody, and you can also tick the box and say everybody's done it, and that then covers a company for from a legal perspective. But now we need to start to look at it from what does the business need to improve that bottom line. And this is the difficult one. This is, and it can be quite, it can be that the learning development departments aren't necessarily that close to the business. And if they are, then great, because it means they can ask the business, what do you need to make sure that we are maybe better customer orientated, that we are selling more, that we are, you know, it's all those kind of really good business questions that they certainly the top C-suite are going to be interested in, and therefore coming up with and using technology that helps you come up with the a better performance, you know, the outcomes are delivered, and you're showing what the impact of learning is on the business. And if you can prove that you are having an impact on the business, then yeah, your job's secure, I would say, from that perspective.
I think this is what we also very much talk about with our clients recently, like start with the business challenge and see how that relates to what you do in the people function and talent development, how you can connect the dots, right? How, and maybe that's one of the reasons that we are still learning how to do it well, as you said. And also I was thinking, because one of my questions, next questions was about this fact that I believe that even if we have a system already, some digital tool, maybe even an ecosystem, it seems the maturity level is relatively low, partially because I believe, and I wonder what you think about it, because the talent development function is as such is still underinvested, and it's also about, you know, headcount. It's about maybe certain skills and competencies, yeah. And maybe it's because the business decision makers do not see a clear return on investment or return on digital investment, and that partially links back to what we just discussed. And maybe there are some other reasons for this, you know, maturity being relatively low. I wonder if there is anything else that you see.
Yeah, and I think you're right that it's about whether or not the functionality has been explored to a degree, that what's the art of the possible, and we have been so used to creating some content, putting it online, and tracking whether somebody's completed or not, that there's very little more. So what else do we do? Now, I think there's something that, going back 20 years from my perspective, that we as a online learning industry promised, was to be able to personalize the learning to the individual. So I remember listening at a presentation going back 20 years to somebody that was saying that the aim of e-learning, as we called it back then, was about delivering what somebody needed to know minus what they already know. And because it's digital, that's possible. That should be possible. And yet we have, as an industry, we failed to do that. There's a little bit of personalization. So if you're a manager, then you maybe get some more training, but down to and there can be a lot of managers and everybody will be getting the same training, but down to the individual and changing what that individual is seeing based on what they've already either completed or done, or the knowledge that they've gained, I think is where we need to be going. And we need to, that is something that is the future, is making it much more personalized. And I think everybody is attempting to do that in some ways. So quite a lot of there's been a lot of talk about artificial intelligence, and we all use the likes of Amazon and Netflix and these sorts of things that will recommend to us, because you've watched this or because you bought this, then why not have a look at this? And I'm still waiting. I'm still waiting for the time when they actually make a recommendation that I've gone down that route. The thing is, if we focus all our personalization just on recommendations engines, I think we're going to miss the point. Because actually we did a round table with some of our corporate clients, if you like, because we talked to the vendors, but we also talked to the corporates, and it was a round table just for them. And I think we were talking about recommendations engines or intelligence in learning systems. And I remember quite vividly one of the attendees there saying, actually, I would rather be recommended something by my peers or my manager than actually the system itself. And so I think that is so true. And if a friend of mine recommends a film or a product that I want to go and buy, I'm likely to go down that route rather than take store of necessarily what the machine learning has decided that is something that's of interest. So I think there's there's different ways of doing this, and we need to work out what's actually what the customer wants, what the learner wants, but also there's so many things that are coming out new, and don't get me wrong, I think artificial intelligence focused in certain areas is working well, but I think sometimes we can also be putting it into things that we can get it wrong because the data is not necessarily particularly good, and that's a whole different probably podcast talking about data in that sense.
Yeah, I guess you're also referring to the whole, analytics piece, right? In the intelligence analytics piece, and how we map even the skills that we have in the company, those kind of key skills, right? So that we maybe have some kind of push mechanisms suggesting some learning formats too, as regards certain domain skills. But there is also some space left for, as you said, peer-to-peer recommendations, and there's more of an optional learning where an employee, a learner has can choose whatever they want to. At the moment, but I guess this all starts with, again, another big topic. We cannot even start and think of opening it now, but it's about skills, right? Skills intelligence, mapping of this, mapping of the critical skills needed, selecting them first and foremost, narrowing them down, and then later on, really like having those AI maybe also enabled algorithms that diagnose this as well. And then make accurate recommendations, because as you say, it needs to be really clean data, good data for those recommendations to also be correct. Yeah. Huge topic for sure to explore. Yeah.
Absolutely, skills, massive topic, and right the way across all our analyst practices, from HR to the sort of talent and people success, the talent acquisition or the recruiting side. We're all the analysts are talking about skills, and all our customers are wanting to talk about skills as well. It's a massive topic at the moment, and interestingly, so where my colleagues maybe talking about the defining on what the skills that the organization needs, and then maybe checking up on the profiles and whatever of the individuals. Ultimately, the reskilling and the upskilling will be done in learning. So that's the strategic play, if you like, for the learning teams to focus is, yes, okay, we can define who's got what skill and even maybe what skills we want in the future. But where we're going to be reskilling and upskilling, that's going to be the job of the learning development department to kind of to own that area so that can happen. So and I think as well there's something else that's starting to be talked about, because we might have over here a list of the skills, and over on the other side we might have a library of content. But where do they cross over? Where do they fit? And so making sure that your content's tagged with the right skills and that's a big job. And that's not necessarily that easy, but that's one area to go. But then the other thing to talk about, which is it's been there forever, but we're only just really beginning to talk about it more from a technology perspective, is the practice of that skill, the mastery of that skill, because you won't learn that skill without doing it. You won't, you'll get to know about it from maybe a piece of online learning or whatever, but you need to do what you've just learned and do it over a number of times to be able to get mastery at it. And that's an area that is, I think, as an industry, we need to kind of look more into how do we record that? How do we and who is going to say that somebody has got that mastery skill? You'll need another master in that skill to be able to maybe watch or whatever and provide the evidence to say, yes, they have achieved a level. And that's a whole different and quite complex area, but at least it's starting to be talked about, I think.
Yeah. And it's also very challenging if you look at the trends of, let's say, employment tenure. Like employees tend to stay shorter and shorter with the companies. So this talent density, as we call it, is not easy to really achieve. So in a way, like more experienced, more senior people tend to attract more senior people, and then you have those masters. But if they keep changing companies, it's also difficult, because what is critical is also the organizational knowledge and context for them to really be able to help others learn in the flow of work, and all through social collaborative learning, close terms, so to speak, concepts. So yeah, it's all a big challenge, especially with this. I call it demographic tsunami. So the talent gap, and at the same time this ever shorter tenure of employees.
And I think again, learning have a big role to speak into that area, because what we have found over the years is that if somebody feels that they are being developed, that they are growing within an organization, they are being allowed to learn and to grow and to develop new skills or whatever, they are more likely to stay with that organization. Learning is a benefit. It's one of those, we talk about rewards, in an organization, but actually learning is one of those, and being trained and improving. And at the point that they feel that they can go no further, that's when an employee is likely to move on and find somewhere that is more challenging. But there is something else. As you were speaking, and talking about that, it just reminded me that in fact another job of the learning technologies is to capture that mastery, potentially with a badge of some sort, but one that can be publicly shown. And I know a lot of the tech companies do this quite well. So whether that's Microsoft or IBM or whatever, their engineers will have a badge that is officially known, and they can put that onto LinkedIn. They can put that onto their CV, and that it is known that they that they have that skill.
Yeah, but extra recognition, right, is really important.
Absolutely, recognition.
Yeah, very much so. I couldn't agree with you, because it's not just sometimes about really the opportunities for promotion. It's really sometimes horizontal development, or really helping others learn, right? That makes people feel the purpose and really want to stay. It's essentially, as you mentioned, it has been for I would say the last 5 years, one of the top 3 reasons for employees to either stay or leave the company. Development opportunities, not necessarily, just promotion, but it could be also interesting, job crafting opportunities, right? And so forth. Yeah, so it doesn't necessarily need to be.
I mean, my colleagues are talking about this a lot, particularly my colleague who looks after the talent and people success grid, and about opportunity marketplace, and that kind of technology that is beginning to. And we say this a lot, that those lines between, or barriers in a way between, it could be knowledge, learning, performance, talent. They're becoming what we call porous. So there are holes, and they are leaking into each other. And so our grids, if you like, we end up with certain organizations being on more than one grid. But then we have also a dilemma to kind of say, right, does that fit more with the talent and people success? Does it fit within digital learning, which is the other grid that we have, as well as the learning systems? And we're constantly having this conversation internally. But this opportunity marketplace is a really interesting one, because that's where it's those opportunities. They could be projects, they could be in other roles. And it's where that individual, that learner can go and do, because either develop their skill or demonstrate their skill in another project or role within an organization. And that's going to be massive, because like you say, it's keeping employees is important, because it's so costly to go through that recruitment process.